god. As I was saying. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then hello, my name's Abby, and here we talk about books all the time. I am back this week, probably with what some of you may think is a controversial video. I'm going to be doing Booktok books that I think personally are worth your time and deserve the hype that they get on and off of TikTok. Now, I always struggled to quantify what I believe to be a Booktok book. What exactly does constitute? What are the merits? What are the requirements? And for the sake of this video, I'm categorizing a Booktok book as a book that I have seen multiple times across my For You page on my TikTok, or a book that I have read specifically because it was recommended to me via TikTok. That is essentially how I'm boiling this video down. You might see a book in this video and be very offended that I've classed as a Booktok book, but please don't be. These are the books that TikTok has been pumping out to me on the app. These are the books that I've seen on the app, and these are books I have read because of TikTok. Being, I will say, one of the first people to join Booktok back in 2021, I'd say back in 2021, considering less books were spoken about on the app, it was kind of just like the big five, the big four, and it was kind of 2014 YouTube, so I had already read all of these books that were kind of blowing up. But since then, I think the app has split off into, I guess, subcategories, subsections. You have creators who will exclusively talk about fantasy books, thriller books, romantasy, lithic, all of the above, and I'm kind of an eclectic mix of all of those. So these are the books that I've seen, loved, and read because of Booktok, one way or another. And with all of that waffle done, let's get into TikTok books that I think are actually good and worth your time. The first book I'm going to talk about should not surprise you if you aren't new to my channel, and particularly if you were following back in 2021, 2022. First of all, thank you. And second of all, you probably know, without me even having to breathe or utter a word, what the first book that I'm going to recommend to you is. And it is, of course, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, aka my holy grail, kind of the first book I really discovered through Booktok and loved. And when I say loved, kind of dedicated my entire existence to the promotion of this book, enforcing everyone humanely possible that I could get my hands on or get into contact to read this book, which was difficult because it was lockdown. At the time that I read this, I was really into Greek myth, historical retellings. I was at university, I was studying literature, and we were doing modules on Greek myth, and I saw this book come up my For You page, and I saw someone saying they were crying about it, blah blah blah, as you do when you read Song of Achilles. So I picked it up, expecting to like it, not expecting to fall head over heels in love with it. But that is exactly what happened. I essentially sold my soul to Madeline Miller and never looked back since. I cannot count on my hand how many videos I made about this book. It was just incredible. This is actually the Bloomsbury special edition of Madeline Miller's book. They do this one, Song of Achilles, and they do Circe. It is signed, and I did receive a little orphan note from Madeline herself, just as a thank you for putting so much support behind this book. Subtle flex, I know, but still. If you aren't familiar with the Song of Achilles and have no idea what it's about, essentially it's based in ancient Greek at the time of the Trojan War, which is kind of like the heart of the story. The main plot of the story is Achilles and Patroclus at the Trojan camp. Before all that happens, we see the bond form between Achilles and Patroclus, and the story that they go on, the journeys that they go through, and the bond that they form between each other, which is absolutely inseparable. It's so beautiful. We see the consequences of this bond and their relationship, the difference in personalities, and how all that accumulates to probably one of the most tragic stories you will ever read. I always struggle to kind of encapsulate the heart of the story and how incredible it actually is, because every time I talk about it, I just want to babble about how much I loved it and what it meant to me. But sometimes, of course, that isn't actually that helpful to people who want to know what it's about. But I always have to say, it is one of the most beautiful, poetic pieces of literature that I've ever read. The way Madeline Miller manages to craft this story, it's going to be studied. I'm absolutely convinced about it. The way she makes you feel and the emotions she can invoke from her writing, her interpretation of these characters, is just phenomenal. It's absolutely out of this world, and for that reason, The Song of Achilles, for the last 3 to 4 years, has always been a book that I recommend. It's always been a book that pops into my head first when someone goes, what's your favourite book? This book is always at the forefront of my mind, and I think if that's the case after 4 years, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I just beg Madeline Miller to please release her next book, because this and Circe, which is another fantastic book that I would recommend alongside this one, are just incredible works of fiction. And yeah, I just need more. If you haven't read this one yet, I really recommend it. I never get bored of talking about this book, and I do believe that off the back of this, so many more authors got picked up and published because they were seeing the traction and the fandom that this story was evoking from readers. Therefore, the first book that I would recommend to you as a Booktok book that is actually genuinely good and worth your time The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Again, the next book that I talk about is probably not a surprise. I probably bored you all to death by talking about this book in the past, and it is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. And I think Fredrik Backman has fast-tracked his way to becoming one of, if not my favourite author ever. Every story that I've read from this man has blown me away, has changed my life, but I think Beartown might be his best work. It always holds such a deep space in my heart because it was just incredible. Fredrik Backman has a way of writing human beings that is unlike anything that I've ever read. It is so raw and vulnerable, but so beautiful at the same time, and the way these characters' lives entwine in the most unexpected yet stunning way will leave you starstruck and unable to think about anything else apart from what happens in this book years after you've read them. In this book, we follow the residents of Beartown, a very small town that by the year kind of dwindles and dwindles away and becomes less relevant. There is hopes for this town to become the next big thing until one brutal act jeopardizes absolutely everything and splits the town essentially into people that want to forget about it, hush it up and pretend that it never happened, and the people who seek justice. I think I was probably crying from the first page, and then I didn't stop really until the end of this series. This is part of a trilogy, I might add, and all books are just as good as the first one, which I think is quite a rare case for trilogies and book series in general. This series in its entirety is phenomenal. This was such an unexpected surprise for me, I won't lie to you. Reading the premise alone wasn't really enough to grip me, but I read it because so many people on the app, on Booktok, were telling me it would be the best thing I've ever read. And you know, I believed them. I've read some incredible books because of that app, and there's creators on there that I trust, of course, and this was one of those that I just had to give a go, and I was so beyond glad that I did. There's no feeling like reading a book, opening the first page and knowing instantly this is a 5-star read for me, and I would urge anyone and everyone to read this because I cannot shout loud enough about this book and about this story, because the story in itself is also so important, the message is so important, and it's inspiring and it's uplifting and it's hopeful, but it's also realistic. Beartown by Fredrik Backman, another Booktok book that I would recommend with my chest. I'm gonna slightly change the tone with the next book rec because it's not like those two books at all. It's a fun romance book, Flawless by Elsie Silver / the entire Chestnut Spring series. Now, as I said at the start of this video, I read quite a variety of genres and books because I think there is merit in every story and in every genre. And I genuinely enjoy reading a romance book. Say what you want about romance books, but they're so much fun and they're so entertaining, and you can flick through and read these all in a single sitting, which sometimes is exactly what you need. They aren't a guilty pleasure. They're not something I'm ashamed of. I will shout about these books as loud as I want and as loud as I can. And in particular, Elsie Silver's, because they're so fun. So if you don't know anything about Chestnut Springs, then let me introduce you, because your life is about to be changed. We have 5 books in this series, and each book follows a different brother / friend based around this certain family in Calgary, Canada. And oh, what can I say about Elsie Silver other than what a wild ride. So addictive. One thing I love in my romance books is a dual pov, and with Elsie Silver, she gives you that and then some. Don't let anyone tell you that reading romance isn't reading or that's embarrassing, because it's absolutely not. When I'm reading a romance as well, I need there to be kind of like a substance to the plot beyond the romance. I need these characters to be complex. I need other things to be going on in the plot and in their lives, and I need them to be messy, which is what all of Elsie Silver's characters are. And in a nutshell, I had the greatest time reading every one. You will want to read them all back to back, and you will have a fantastic time doing so. So yeah, Flawless by Elsie Silver and the rest of the Chestnut Spring series are Booktok books that I would recommend wholeheartedly. Next book is another one that I wasn't expecting to love. It was something that I'd been seeing on the app so much and was kind of just getting tired of not being involved and not understanding the references. So I just kind of was like, I'm gonna bite the bullet, I'm gonna read it. It's not normally my cup of tea, but maybe I'll have a good time. And have a good time I did. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Now, I don't claim to be a thriller girly. I don't really know the first thing about thriller books because I don't tend to pick them up and choose to read them. But this one genuinely made me question that. Holly Jackson worked some magic on me when I was reading this book, and I couldn't put it down. I had to be talking about this book constantly, like I was the one trying to solve these puzzles and these murders. 5 years ago in this town there was a murder, but our main character Pip doesn't believe that it was solved correctly. She thinks that the murderer is still walking free. So for her EPQ project, she decides to reinvestigate and reopen this case and try and solve it herself. Very ambitious. This book was a ride, let me tell you that. This whole series was a ride, and it kind of got darker. No, it didn't kind of. It did get darker and darker as each book went on, And I think that the third book in this series was so dark for me, who doesn't read thrillers. I was not expecting it, and I think the third one is genuinely the best. Not to take away from this book, because this is so much fun. There's like a mixed media element, which I always love in books. There's transcripts, articles, diary entries. It's so fun, it's so engaging. I'm so looking forward to Holly Jackson's adult book that comes out this year. This book didn't feel like a YA book. It really didn't. Not to say it's a bad thing for a book to feel YA. As a 25-year-old reading this book, I didn't notice that it was written for younger audiences. Oh, I just loved it so much. If you want to be a thriller reader, and it made me want to try new things and new genres. What else is out there that I'm missing out on? A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is a book that I genuinely think deserves all of its hype and is a cracking Booktok book. Another book that I was seeing so much across my For You page and recommended to me by the people that I follow on Booktok, which I'm sure some of you will argue with me that it isn't a Booktok book, but for me it was. I discovered it on Booktok. I read it because of Booktok. And that is Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. Potentially the most lyrical and poetic book I've ever read in my life. This book is less than 150 pages, but the impact that it had on me should be studied. It's not the most accurate comp, but if you love Normal People by Sally Rooney, then I think you will absolutely love this book, potentially even more. It is a very important analysis on what it means to be a black man, and asks what it means to be a person in a world that only sees you as a black body, and how two people who are meant to be together are torn apart by fear and by violence. I think I remember reading this in about 2 to 3 hours. I also love Small Worlds by the same author. It's just as beautiful, just as poetic. And on top of that, this book is a debut. When you read this book knowing that fact, you will be gobsmacked. I've read tons and tons of books in my lifetime, but I don't think any have hit me as hard as Open Water did. And for that reason, and the many that I've discussed in this video already, Open Water deserves all of its hype, and it is an incredible book. I know it's probably not to a lot of people a Booktok book, but to me, it's where I found the book, it's where I was recommended the book multiple times, and it's why I picked it up. I loved it so much, and I would really, highly recommend this book. The next book I'm going to talk about kind of took over the internet, I would say, and took over everybody's lives when it came out. It is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy, which I think has one of the most intriguing titles. Of course, Jeanette McCurdy's autobiography. I actually listened to this one on audiobook because Jeanette narrates it herself, and I think that added so much to the impact of the story. Of course, many of us know Jeanette from our childhood. I think before this book came out, there was a lot that was speculated on about Jeanette. A lot was said about how that wasn't true. And to have her moment, and to have her story, and to have her story heard by so many people is so powerful, and it's so special. And I know it sounds weird because I don't know her personally, but I'm really proud of her for having the courage to tell the story to millions of people, because that is not an easy thing to do, especially when you're being so raw and you're being so vulnerable. And she was being so honest and uncovering some pretty horrible truths. I think to do that and to know people that are going to be talking about you is an incredibly brave thing to do. But not only that, it was also very well written. It always feels weird even attempting to talk about someone's memoir or even rating it. I don't really tend to do that because it is non-fiction. It's someone's real life story, so it feels weird to be like, oh, it is really well written, but genuinely in this case it was. And I think Jeanette really shows her personality in this book as well. It was really funny, it was really engaging, she was obviously very honest. I won't lie, it was also very heartbreaking to read and to know what she went through, both as a child into adulthood, and how that all affected her and her consequent actions in life. But in my opinion, this was art. I loved it so much. And again, I read this because of Booktok, because of people talking about it, recommending it, sharing snippets of the audiobook. I'm Glad My Mum Dies would also really recommend this book and deserves all of its hype. The last book that I'm going to talk about in this video as a Booktok book that I think deserves all of its hype is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Again, this isn't the first time I've spoken about this book, and it won't be the last. If you don't know, this is Stephanie Garber's second trilogy, I want to say, young adult trilogy, following on from Caraval. Now, you don't have to read Caraval to read this and understand what's happening, but it does give a bit more context and background to the story. I wasn't the biggest fan of Caraval, so I was quite skeptical going into this book, but it turned out to be one of my favourites. It is a perfect romantic read with the whimsical vibes. And I don't really know how else to adequately describe it, but it's so magical. Evangeline and Jax are probably one of my favourite fictional ships and pairings. The book opens with Evangeline Fox discovering that the love of her life is about to marry another, not just anybody, but her stepsister. She's so desperate to stop the wedding and to prove that she can have her happily ever after that she strikes up a bargain with Jax, the Prince of Hearts. But of course, the deal wasn't as straightforward as she had anticipated, and she's essentially been tricked and is now trapped in this bargain with this cruel, evil fate. There was so much tension and yearning in this book, which I think is missing from a lot of adult romances and adult fantasy books. Bring back tension and bring back yearning the way it's done in this book, because it was perfection. Such a fun read, such a fun series, the perfect escapism. Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber will consume you. But like I said at the start, this has probably been quite a controversial video. Do let me know what you thought. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, let me know. I literally love reading your comments. It's one of my favourite things to do. And just a side note to say, thank you so much for 15,000 subscribers. Absolutely insane. While still watching, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, put the notifications on for a new video. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. It genuinely does mean the world to me. And I will see you again next week. Bye!